Why don't we get started? First of all, I want to thank you all for joining us, and let me just take a minute to welcome you and then introduce who we are. So I'm Laurie Ledford, and I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer for Marsh & Glenn Companies. It's good hair day. Those are happy with that picture. And my partner today for this presentation, as well as for the cultural journey that we're going to take you through, is Ben Brooks. His title is way too long for me to go through, so we'll get him to explain that after, or you can tweet his name about that. So, let me tell you a paid political announcement about our company really quick, 30 seconds. Marsh, we're going to focus on Marsh today. We're the world's largest risk advisor. And we are in 100 countries, 400 offices, with 25,000 employees all around the world. Very established organization. Probably most of the organizations you work with do business with maybe Marsh or with one of our sister companies. We've been in business for 140 plus years. And I also want to give a little plug over here for Mercer. So if you haven't been to the expo, Mercer's a sister company of Marsh & Glenn, and they're in booth 108. So that's how you go visit the Mercer booth over here. So, let's get started. And I want to take you back to a time when I joined Marsh, and that was in 2000. And I want to give you sort of a feel for what that organization was like at that time. It was a really nice place to work. Really genuine people, very caring, very relationship focused, really connected to each other, cared about the firm, cared about their clients. So it was a great organization to be a part of. It was very comfortable and it attracted people who liked to be comfortable. We had a group of managing directors, about 1,000 people or 25,000 people, and there was zero turnover at that time. Nobody ever left. But our average turnover, probably more remarkably, was only 6%. So people came and they really stayed. The average age of our employees was 48 years old. And they had 16 years of service with us. So if you looked at where they worked, if they worked somewhere else, they had worked in the industry. So we were an organization steeped in our past and our traditions. We operated a lot like a partnership. Very collaborative and consensus-driven. It was a nice place to walk into our offices in New York at 1166 Avenue of the Americas. There were beautiful flower arrangements on every floor, and there were receptionists on every floor. And there was a wonderful person that went into each floor every morning and made coffee, made sure that it was all set up so that you would go in and you poured your coffee, and that was happening throughout the entire day. In addition, at lunchtime, an individual came around with a cart, and you could buy your salad or your sandwiches or little snacks, and you didn't have to really get up and leave your desk, and it was very convenient and very comfortable. And so it was this sort of very warm and caring environment, until it wasn't. We sort of ran into a little issue in 2004 with the Attorney General of the United States, and he decided that he had of New York, excuse me, he decided that he took exception to some of our business practice and basically accused us of breaking the law. Now, we're a regulated industry organization, so we have to have a license to be able to operate. And so if you break the law and you're found guilty, that means you lose your license. If you lose your license, that means you go out of business. That's not a really good thing for the 25,000 people that worked at our company. And so we were thrust into this incredibly tumultuous situation that we didn't anticipate, and frankly didn't really know how to get out of. And the company, at all costs, had tried to preserve the jobs of the colleagues who worked for us. So the notion of letting people go, having a riff, was something that we had just never entertained. And now we're faced with really no choice in that matter, because 55% of our revenue goes to paying the people that walk in and out of our door every day. So if you have to react in a crisis, the only thing you really have to look at are the people. It's hard to sell a building or get out of real estate or do those kinds of things. So we were in this really, really difficult period of time. We started to try to right the ship, and that went into 2005, and that went into 2006, and that went into 2007. And the journey was just painful for the organization.
And so, I came in, and in 2009, I'd come from Oliver Wyman Management Consultancy, and I was new to HR, and I was new to Marsh & Glenn Corporate. And I came in and I saw this organization that was really kind of bound and wound in a lot of ways. By the way, people in the back, we have a couple seats up front, so feel free to come on in. I don't make you have to stand the whole time. But, so I come in with this sort of fresh set of eyes. I hadn't seen this 10-year trajectory. Lori, I mean, we didn't mention 9/11, but 10% of people that died on 9/11 worked for Marsh. And that was a horrific loss, and then you had this in '04. But here it's 2009, people would talk about Spitzer, who was Attorney General at the time, they would talk about it like it was yesterday. It was this like fresh wound. And I was so surprised. I think we're actually in the wrong business here. We should be in the history business. We'd be great historians. Every meeting was about what happened 3-4 years ago with this CEO before they got fired, et cetera. And it was so past-focused. And we were getting, actually we were preparing for a retreat. We had a third party do some interviews, and they did interviews with, private interviews with a few of our executives. One of them described it as, you want me to grow, but I'm still mopping the blood off the floor from all the friends that I fired. You get the sentiment there? So this was, so collegial in such a family. And we fired probably nearly, we were like a 35,000 person company at one point. We ended up being about a 25,000 person company. Significant change, a lot of the perks gone, a lot of the cushy gone. And again, from a brand and a player that was at the top of its game within the industry, we lost our mojo and we're in a very difficult place. And so I came and I walked in, yet at the same time I saw people who were deeply dedicated and loyal to the firm. We saw great, deep expertise. Within our industry, Marsh is known for having the brains and risk management, the deep industry expertise and specialty and segment expertise. And so it's like, gosh, we have all these kind of assets over here, but we're so stuck in the past. We're so, looking at, at the future through the rearview mirror. It was just the wrong paradigm. But we saw this opening. And that opening was about what do we do to get out of what this funk we've been in, this cloud we've been in. And how do we think differently? And I came across this book called The 3 Laws of Performance. If you haven't read it, I definitely put it on your must-read list. It's by Steve Zaffron and Dave Logan. And it basically says organizations are a network of conversation. What is an organization? It's a bunch of people, right? And they're in a conversation. And the conversation affects performance. It affects how things occur to people. And leaders have a say in what language is used in that conversation. So guess what the conversation was about at Marsh? In one word, survival. Have the company survive and me survive. So I then don't want to get laid off and lead the organization, want to keep Marsh in business, not be taken over or gutted or whatever else. So the conversation was all about survival, but yet what the market wanted to see from us and what the CEO needed to do was grow. And growth and survival are mutually exclusive. And so we were in this conversation around survival. It's like, how do we change that conversation? So I'm going and I'm working at corporate at the time, influencing my boss, thinking about what we could do. And it was really interesting because then Lori came across the same idea.
And as you can imagine, a company that went through the kind of crisis that we did also went through a crisis of leadership. So not only did we change leaders, we had leaders that we put at sort of battlefield appointments. And they really weren't prepared, and it didn't work. And so we changed leadership again. And this continued on, so this sort of added to the turmoil of the organization. And we finally got a leader in place who took a look at where we were and said, we didn't do enough. Frankly, we didn't clear enough runway. There's not enough of a path for us to be able to do the kind of things that we need to do. So we've got to look at expenses. And so we sort of doubled down and took another look and had another round of layoffs. Again, you imagine the painfulness of this organization. And I remember sitting down with him after about 6 months and saying, you're being talked about as the expense guy. Everybody thinks you're the expense guy. It's like, I've never been the expense guy. I'm the growth guy. I can't believe they think I'm the expense guy. So that's all you talk about. So if you don't talk about anything else, what are people going to think is our focus? It's cut our way to glory. We're going to grow our way to some sort of wonderful success. And fortunately, the CEO had actually started his career at Marsh. And he remembered the days, and he remembered those positive attributes that the company had, the relationship and the deep industry knowledge, and how people really came together in a crisis. And so he said, I noticed this. I go home to my apartment at night, and I sit there and think, why is everybody so negative? So this is all we talk about is the past and the bad things in our past, and we have to shift that conversation. So this book actually lands on his desk. He takes a bit of a read at it. He passes it over to me, and I read it all. And I thought, this is it. This is how we change the conversation. We've got to get our leaders to be thinking different. We have to move from the crisis and survival to thinking about our future. But we didn't know where that future actually was.
And so fast forward, we convinced the CEO to do this retreat, which is very unlike anything we've done. If you read this book, you'll see it's very intense and personal about how these conversations, and it really acknowledges that people are people. It's not a work self and a personal self, there's just been. And so it gets into that. So we convinced him to take our top 40 leaders from around the world. We go to some place out on Long Island, some retreat center for 3 days, fly people in from 5 continents. And the night before it started, he gave a speech. And Dan likes, our CEO, Dan was at the time, likes to prepare remarks in advance. He's very thoughtful. And he declared the company fixed. It was actually really powerful, like line of demarcation. He said, we are not here to fix the company this weekend. We are here to transform the company. He's like, management is always judged by its second act. And so before we even got into any of this work, he said, our survival chapter is now closed. Why? Because I said so. And it actually really helped people cognitively come to terms with that and at peace and say, okay, what we did is done, and we were successful in that. So now, what's next? What is next for this storied brand?
So we have an organization that we're in this place where we're getting ready to try to put the past, we're putting the past behind us, but we don't have our future mapped out yet. And through the activities that we did in this group, we declared a new future for the organization. Now, we started with something that sounded like, we'll be the best insurance broker in the world. Now, I'm not from insurance. I'm actually an HR professional. It's what I always wanted to do. And I worked most of my career banking in HR. And I said to the group, it's not very aspirational for me. I mean, to be honest, I don't think insurance brokers are known to be world-class elite organizations. So could we shoot a little higher than that? Okay, we'll be the best insurance company. All right, so a little bit better, a little bit better, but we're still sort of not in there. Finally, the CEO said, you know what we need to do is be a great paid place to work for outstanding people. So he declared that possibility for our future.
And he shares that, and I'm in this room, right? I'm in the back. That's the last thing we would have expected of this team. We did. People, what a great place to work at Marsh was the last few years is you didn't get riffed. That's a great place. You have a paycheck. Congratulations. Shut up. Get back to your desk. That was, essentially, because we were in such a survival mode, it was command and control. It was very top down. So it had to be a great place to work, a place and the people together. And then there's a commitment to create Marsh University. Well, what was that? Well, we'd done an engagement survey. We did all the factor analysis, and we found out career development was the most important thing to colleagues. It was responsible for the greatest variation in engagement. And, oh, by the way, we did a really bad job at that. Super important, very low performance. So what do we do about that? So there was this commitment to create, and that's literally the direction we commit to create the Marsh University Career Development Center. No other detail other than that. And the CEO had looked at Lori and he asked you,
can you do it? And I looked at Benjamin and I said, I think we can do it. And so there's where Marsh University was started.
So that it was a genesis, right? You started from nothing, and a little like the Declaration of Independence. In our country, it was declared. It didn't happen. You go fight a war afterwards to make that happen. But it was a notion of putting your butt on the line. And a lot of executives are not willing to do that and to make commitments. We didn't have any plans. We didn't have a total cost ownership thing modeled out, any long-term project plan. This was just a commitment, which, oh, by the way, we communicated with the whole firm within weeks. And so everyone in the firm knew that we were committed to do something. Think of the last time, if ever, at your company, you've communicated really clear commitments. And put your butt on the line. Just a commitment. We were to commit to doing something. It's typically you only communicate after the fact, after you've done something, so you're sure it got done. So that was a big part of that. So as we thought about Marsh, we thought about what do we do to develop people. We thought about, obviously most of you have probably seen the 70-20-10 model of development and learning. The thing is that there was all this talk about formal learning. Let's have classrooms and training and all this. And that's very problematic when you have 400 offices. It's also problematic because it's really not that effective at developing brains of adults. And we didn't have $100 million to go to White Plains or Connecticut to build some beautiful off-site facility, anything like that. We needed to do something very, very quick, and we needed to do something that was going to be lean and efficient. But also, when you think about informal social on the job, we kind of had a university already at Marsh. It was called the School of Hard Knocks. And so people certainly, when you think about your own career, it's the experiences you've had and things that can develop you. But the thing is, the company didn't do anything to really structure those or support that. It was all just the kind of brute force. So we said, how do we exploit that 70%? That's where we'd like to double down.
And we knew that when the idea of Marsh University was created, what was going on in the executive's mind was a brick and mortar kind of university. How can we cleverly sort of figure out how we will bring people together? Remember, and the first thing you do when you are in a crisis of an organization that's all people that walk in the door and intellectual capital is you start to shrink the investment in them. So any learning dollars, of course, could become completely cut out of the budgets. We were doing very little, yet our colleagues told us how important it was.
So also, if you think about spend, so forget all the headcount ratio stuff in HR. That stuff is easy to gain, especially with outsourcing. The best metric, I think, of just simply looking at your investment in HR is total HR spend divided by total number of colleagues. HR spend per capita. So based on Saratoga benchmark, Marsh is a little under average in that. And that includes all of our HRIS and everything else. But this is where we were. So we weren't fat with money. And if you think of necessity as the mother of invention, we actually had to do a lot with a little. And in fact, we had no additional money. We made these commitments, but it wasn't like the CEO said, hey, Lori, here's a box of gold, here's $5 million, go do this. We funded, how did we pay for this?
Well, so as the CHRO over time, you have to make some choices. I had to make some choices. So we certainly need to do things that run the organization efficiently. We have to get really better at that. And operational stuff is really important. And yet I knew if I didn't find some way within the HR budget to start to shift some of our emphasis and frankly our dollars on things like engagement, on building a culture, on things like Marsh University, it was not going to happen. So believe you lead by example. And so we started making small changes in the way that we're staffed and where we put our attention and how we actually set goals for the HR organization, of course, for the rest of the organization too.
And you saw the presidential debate last week, no matter which side of the debate you're on, that both candidates talked about budgets are reflections of values. And so we started to shift where our value was, where we were starting to invest. And again, it was a lot easier when it was within HR because Lori didn't have to go to our CEO or anyone else. It was money within her budget, so she could move that around. But that was a very strategic choice of ours to fund it from within. Anyone know where this is? San Francisco, right? World-class city, wonderful place. And what's interesting, if you've spent much time there, is every morning they have a bit of a fog problem. If you're flying at SFO, you know what I'm talking about. But about 10:30 in the morning, it tends to burn off. Well, the thing is, there's nothing wrong with San Francisco. In fact, this is a world-class city below, but there's this fog over it. Well, it's a little like how organizations look from the executive floor sometimes. You can't see the wonderful city, you just see a fog. And the fog is covering a lot of your hidden assets, untapped passion, expertise, knowledge, ideas, wisdom. Not just knowing the science of your business, but also the art of your business. So for our firm, we knew that we were just fat with assets, but they're not on our balance sheet. They probably should be. How do we burn off that fog? In fact, the best of Marsh is typically in one of two places, on a hard drive or in a head. Both of those things can walk out the door very easily to competitors. They certainly can't be leveraged if you're not in that office. And so we wanted to make that available to the whole firm.
So we said about how do we actually look for those assets in the organization and where do they reside and how could we connect them and how could we really tap them so that they were available to everybody.
So, in doing this, we started an experiment, which I'll tell you about in just a second about how we went about that. But, you had to find people this is such a different approach. Again, everything we did historically, we have 141 years behind us. And to do things very, very differently, how do you identify the people that are willing to try something completely new? Because we couldn't get from a change management perspective, you can't get everyone to just completely buy in and be hands up and excited about it. So we had to identify some of those early adopters that were going to be open to just doing things very, very differently. And I think when we talked about the learning paradigm, I think people are so used to what I always call the mama bird, baby bird thing, is that mama bird's going to get the worm, chew it all up, and spit it in baby bird's mouth, and that's called learning, right? And so, so that was just a very kind of old model, and because we realized that there was so much to get out there and to, uncover those assets. So, because this is supposed to be social and interactive, I'm actually going to ask you for the next 2 or 3 minutes to talk to the people around you, next to you, around you, I'll manage that. But I'm going to have you think about what are the hidden assets at your firm, and what's the fog, and where is the fog. So take 2 to 3 minutes, and we'll hear from all of you to talk about what at your firm are the things that you can't see but you know are there, or that are sequestered. Where is it knowledge fracking you need to do? How might that come to the surface? So take 2 minutes to do that.
Knowledge fracking. As long as it doesn't contaminate our water, bring to the surface. Yes, we can do social.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. I mean, for us, it is a world of opportunity and hidden assets that are just sitting in people's minds. It's the data, the people, what's happening.
Part of it is in this new contractor free agent model is that how do you extract it without getting their views?
Right.
Because they see it as their asset,
right.
Not your asset.
Right.
They're not employees who want to give to the company blood.
Right.
They think it's bloodletting and they don't want to give it.
Well, they're lending you this and they're taking those away.
Pay for their assets.
Right.
It's exchange.
You pay for it to walk in and walk out. I mean, you stop paying and walk out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing too that it went from the company that on the Apple, on the Google, on a big
That
box
would be
like
priceless.
GE.
Yeah.
Because they
And
have
those that left it aren't successful. I mean, that's the key for seniors that have made it. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, so now we'd like to hear from a couple of you about what you shared. So go ahead and wrap up. So who wants to share? Okay.
And who's going to be next? Well, we just like to get this to you. Who's going to go second?
So we talked about the fog at our company, and I think we are from a startup, and so a lot of it has to do with process, either lack of process, or now we just got purchased by a huge organization, so now it's too much process. So I'm kind of going back and forth with that. But I feel like that is really our fog in our organization, is the process around that.
I can tell you, acquisitions are an interesting thing about if you've been acquired, joining some new maze, there's a ton of fog for newcomers. And oftentimes there's great assets and people, but it's like, what do you do with that?
Here.
I just wanted to share, because we came from two very opposite ends of the spectrum, the fog and QBE. She highlighted that the talent or the ideas are very decentralized, and people kind of don't want to share much. So there's the best practice, I do it best, but it doesn't mean that everybody's leveraging the best practice. I'm with Hyatt Hotels, and I'd say that our issue actually comes more from the corporate level, that we need to be strategic and structured right to reach out to our employees at all the hotels, because they are actually very eager to get involved in support initiatives and things like that. We just need to give them the right strategies and the right questions and make sure that we're leveraging across cycles.
So two really different perspectives. One is something that we actually heard we're going to talk more about, is this idea of that it's a little bit of what could go wrong. And how do we get people to come into this thing that we're creating? So there's sort of that side of it. And then we sort of thought the same thing. Maybe people will want to hoard, and it didn't turn out to be the case. So we'll talk more about that. And the opposite is there has to be some way to make it available to people. So you want some guardrails and some standards and some ways to put some structure. So let's face it, it's really different. You've never blogged before. It can seem like daunting, right? So how do you get people to take that step? Yeah, good, great, thank you.
Who else wants to share? Anybody else? For $100? Okay. So, not next time you guys. So, next up.
So, we thought about our phone, and we thought about our hidden assets in the organization, and we knew that we had this really incredible brand that was full of expertise and ideas, and people had done some really amazing things in the industry. What we suspected, though, was that there were a lot of people in our organization that had expertise that we had no idea of knowing about. So when you think about from an HR perspective, right, we collect all this data about people where we worked before and where we went to school, and so we ask you what we want to know, but we probably don't ask you what you want to tell us about. And so this idea was born that rather than saying, like, what do you want to learn? This is interesting and good, but what do you have to teach? Remember, we had wiped out all our content, so we needed to create content too, but we knew it resided in our organization.
So what's interesting is we actually had this notion of expertise before, and we had 25,000 colleagues, remember? We had 500 anointed experts. Apparently the other 24,500 people weren't expert at anything, which could be a little disempowering if you're one of them. Additionally, they were typically experts in only one thing, or one domain, or one whatever, and that's, when you think about a professional services firm, you're probably good at a lot of different things, especially if you've been in the business a while. And so it was very limiting, I think, to Lori's point about HR data and structure. So I might be a guy in HR. You probably wouldn't ask me about operations, but I'm the trained Six Sigma black belt. You probably wouldn't ask me about airlines, but I worked in the aviation industry for a number of years as a management consultant. There's expertise and things professionally, plus personal interests and skills or things I'd like to be involved in, that there's just the sense that there's a whole world around each individual person. And how do you share and leverage that? Because, in particular, it's really fun for me to get operations questions because it's not what I used to do, but not what I do now, but it's something I really like to do. So we've introduced the notion that everyone's a teacher. And what do I mean by everyone? Do I mean managing directors? Yes. Do I mean administrative assistants? Yes. Now, administrative assistants, I don't know if your company's like mine, they kind of run about half the company. If they did like some wildcat sort of strike thing or whatever, the place would just fall completely apart. And so they know how to get a lot done. In fact, administrative assistants, although they often might not get paid a lot, are extremely knowledgeable and they add a ton of value. and can help make a lot of other people very, very effective.
And so we thought about this sort of really collaborative culture that we had. And yet, how do we untap this knowledge and experience and all these things that people could bring forward? Now, one of the things I want to give Ben a lot of credit for was he was terrific at scanning sort of what's going on in the outside world. And so I would have never been tweeting and Instagramming and all those things I'm doing now, but sort of hadn't had a chance to have somebody open my mind, because I only know what I know. And I know what I don't know, but I don't know what I don't know. So I needed help with that. Ben brought this wonderful organization to us. And the name of the group was Red Rover, and they talked a lot about engagement and the theory around the dance floor. And so this room in a way kind of reminds me of the dance floor, because you got sort of people in the center, and you got people kind of like hanging around on the outside of the dance floor. And to have people from the outside come right into the center, that's like a really, really hard thing to do. So we applied some of this dance floor theory to how we created Marsh University and how we got people to be able to teach.
So you think about like a hub for spokes. Marsh was all spokes and no hub, right? I think that's a metaphor. The spokes is a knowledge, passion, skill, insight, whatever. We have people with all sorts of things out there that we didn't know. How do you connect this together? As Lori mentioned, it becomes this dance floor. Well, what's fascinating about a dance floor, it is the most interesting social experiment you can have, right? It is a petri dish about human behavior and dynamics. And I think we got into the behavior about wanting to share or not wanting to share. So, thinking dancing is a metaphor, etc. Different people behave differently within this 30 by 30 square. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about expectations. It's very easy in your organization. This is extremely important when you're doing something that's social, something that's new. Most of your executives will have no experience with social, in particular social in the enterprise. If they do it, it's because they looked over their kid's shoulder at Facebook, and then they therefore know social. No. So, first of all, 90%, it's 99.1 for those of you that know this rough rule of thumb. 90% of people in online communities are lurkers. They're the wallflowers. They're watching everyone else dance, and this is 90%. So that's something to understand and to realize, is that if you're going to expect, if you got 50,000 colleagues, you're going to have 50,000 bloggers. No way. Now, 9% of the people are the ones, they're like trying to dance, they get the shoulder going like a little bit, it's like a little groove, They don't quite have their single ladies dance down, but they're the passive contributors. Now, the lurkers are the type, they log on Facebook and they go through their, ex-husband's photo album or whatever else, and then they just click the browse and close button and they're done, right? They didn't break anything. The 9%ers, they'll like something or they'll share something or they'll comment on something, but it's a pretty passive contribution. Now there's the break dancers. There's the 1%. These are the folks that are blogging and vlogging and sharing on Instagram and putting photo albums up, and they're generating the content. And so this is generally how these communities work. Now what's interesting is the relationship is the 1%ers need feedback. If you do a big break dance and then no one's watching or you don't get applause at the end of it, you might not dance again. And so the 9%ers are extremely important feedback loop for those people. And then the lurkers, lurking is learning. There's nothing wrong with lurking, but the goal is to get a lurker to become a passive contributor and a passive contributor to become an active contributor. Just moving everyone in from an engagement perspective, one level in. You know what? The wallflowers lurkers, they're not going to become break dancers. They might over time, but not overnight. And it's kind of the notion of bend, don't break. Move them in just a little bit, but don't make them break dance in the middle of a freak out.
We had to take this concept to make sure we were managing the expectations of the organization, right? So 25,000 employees, we're going to launch this thing, and all 25,000 are going to blog and comment, they're going to post their pictures, and they're going to, we knew it wasn't going to happen like that, because people have to come in gradually in their own way and how it works and appeals for them. So we set really clear expectation using some of the external metrics that we could come up with to talk about, this is what we should anticipate happening. And we did that for our executive committee and I'll say in an ad nauseum sort of a way, and certainly in not the way that they were used to seeing data and metrics before.
I think what's interesting is we measured everything. So we actually treated it like a real business and a real project. So if you want your HR initiative, whether it's social or talent management or recruiting or anything else, start showing up charts and numbers like your CFO would or your COO would or your head of IT would, or they show up with a lot of data, a lot of facts, a lot of insights, and it becomes pretty real when there's numbers. A game isn't really a game unless it's a scoreboard. So, put a scoreboard up. So this is just, one of a gazillion graphs we had. Super, super basic. It takes like 4 minutes to do this, right? But we would do population-adjusted profile adoption with or without photos by region. Well, we're a geographic P&L structured company. So guess what? We just were like FYI. We put it online, shared it, which again, being transparent on our data was not something we were used to. It was just FYI. We had a goal up there. All of a sudden, at one point, Latin America, LAC, you see there were 8%. They were definitely worst. And their CEOs, like, we have the highest growth in the company, organic growth. Why would we have the lowest profile? This makes no sense. And literally, it became something where he got, really vexed about the whole thing because he saw the data. They became, it went from worst to first.
It is important about our organization because we do measure how we perform. We're P&L business, and we are for profit, so our leaders are conditioned that way. And it's not just let's start in January, figure out how it ends up in December. It's month by quarter. And so the idea that we set these targets and then we were giving the organization feedback created this really wonderful, healthy dynamic of competition. And so we had regional leaders that were competing against other regional leaders, but in a really, really healthy way within their own teams and trying to create ways to get colleagues, whether it's profiles or whatever it was we were trying to do at that particular time.
And, we meet resistance, right? So there'd be these myths and these points of view. People have a lot of opinions on things. And a really great way to bust through that is with some facts. I'm like, great point, that's really interesting. I can see why you might think this. Here's what the data has shown us. And that pretty much ends that conversation because you have the facts and the insight out of that to prove that. Now, what we wanted to do, though, as we got started, is we needed to start, because, again, we have a time pressure, okay? So we have, so we're trying to burn off the fog. We have this declaration to create Marsh, but then literally within a couple months, we got to do something. This can't be a 3-year rollout plan where we're going to define requirements and do this big thing and build it and, test it and do AT and blah, blah, and boom, Home Depot, drop it on your employees. No, that's not what's going to happen. What we're looking to do is get something out there quickly. So you can see how fancy this microsite is. It costs about $2,000 to make in 1 week. It has one paragraph of text, a 30-second flash video without any voiceover on it, and it simply says, at Marsh, everyone's a teacher, what will you teach? This is a petition. Now think about in your community, if there's like a new club or condo complex or something that's coming, they put up a site like this, coming soon, and builds in mystique or something exciting, sexy, and they market it. We wanted to do the same thing. There's a lot of buzz. We wanted to create more buzz inside the firm so there was a pull. We wanted people to be a little bit like, what is this thing? And they're, again, so expecting, caps and gowns and Mama Bird and the worms and blah, blah. We wanted to think this is very, very different. Now, what was cool is we said, what we would teach. Well, what was interesting is we had a goal, a target. We aligned with our executives, including our CEO up front. We had 7 times the response rate to this ask than our goal. So we had people that, it was clearly this pent-up demand to participate and to engage and to share. And so we had people from all over the world, and it'd be, I'm Ben Brooks, I'm from New York, and I'm going to talk about, I'm going to teach you how to do a Kaizen. Or, Lori would talk about how to run effective meetings.
And what was, I think, what was so unique for us about this? So we've done things where we sort of do a little splash and, look, it's going to come and we're building it and all this. But we actually got people in right from the very beginning. So nothing's happening yet other than this and saying, come and be a part of it.
And Walt Disney always said, leave them wanting more. So we just gave them a little bit, and they wanted more, and they were curious about it, which was so different, again, from how we typically roll out initiatives within a large firm. And this was really the spark. This was the first time, because we talked about marketing conceptually, right? And put it in a memo or on the internet, blah, blah, blah. This actually started to become real. People said, gosh, I have a sense of pride in the firm as I see this scroll. We didn't do pagination, so you could just scroll completely down, and you're almost overwhelmed by how much you will do and the passion and talent and diversity of our colleagues. And they said, gosh, this feels like a way we can make the firm feel like a much smaller place. And I like that. So that was kind of the first spark of what we did. Now, what we also started with is we didn't build a gigantic IT infrastructure. We started, if you think of the university model, we built one classroom at a time. So if you've heard of agile development methodology, we're definitely in that space. We're using some of the coolest technology out there, which we can talk about later. But what the idea was is how do we get something out there quickly? I mean, the college, now there's an itch, there's a mystique, people are excited. Well, we couldn't say, hey, coming soon in 16 months with a delay, right? Sorry, we're stuck in, the discovery phase or something. Like, no one cares, right? They're like, where's my thing? So we started with the notion of one classroom, which again was lower cost, and actually really from a risk perspective, we're a risk management company. We want to take risk out. This is something completely new, and when you're doing something innovation and new, it's pretty tough to take a 3 or 4 year bet and just say, hey, I think it's all going to work out this way, and it's going to work on these timelines, and people will respond in this way, and I need $10 million. That's a pretty high risk bet. We wanted to de-risk this investment by starting small and letting us be agile so we could kind of go where we needed to go.
You have to remember, we had an appropriate level of HR budget, sort of in the ballpark, right? But we didn't have sort of this big pot of money to use. So we wanted to also be sort of somewhat cautious and make sure we were doing the right things to meet organizational needs. I'd like to tell you that we sort of had it all planned out 2 years in the back of our head. We knew where exactly we were going to go. We had it planned out about 6 months ahead, and then continue to roll that out as we learn. from the organization as people participated and gave us feedback.
Yeah, we didn't build 3 or 4 year plans. The typical thing where you go to a business case and gigantic project plan, total cost of ownership, we did not do that. We did 6-month detailed operational plans that we actually executed. We had detailed metric plans, detailed change management plans, detailed technical architecture plans, but we actually went and did those. Sometimes they were only a week or 2 out. You know, we're in Pivotal Tracker, you know, moving case, you know, stories around based upon the usability feedback we get. We do that in a very, very, very quick way. Again, very different for IT. Now, this probably does not look like your traditional LMS. Even if you go to the expo floor today, I doubt you'll see anything that looks very sexy or cool like this. And so what we decided to do is we used a little technology called WordPress in 2009 or 10, whatever this was. And you know, now it's become a de facto standard for blogging, free and open source software. Very not the thing we typically do. You know, we like hard code something from the ground up. And so we said, no, let's actually use what's out there, state of the market, run the newest instance of it. And so we built this thing. All we had, remember, were a few teachers. We burned off the fog. We found some people to sign the petition. We helped them with their content. And we actually uploaded all the blogs. We didn't teach anyone to get into the back end of WordPress. Not a good use of a managing director's time to have them futz around with that. It's like, if you can email, you can blog. Just send it to one of my team members and we'll take care of it. We still do that today. Very high-touch model, but it's all about leveraging, getting the right behavior, which is the sharing of knowledge, not uploading in the back of some CMS. Who cares? So we put this up there. It's highly visual. You'll see the pictures, which we'll talk about in a second. But again, this happened 2 months after the petition. Here's the next thing. And again, this was just the start. This was the first classroom. We didn't have profiles in it. We didn't have social feeds or anything like that. It was simply blogs. The other thing, you know, you think about the dance floor and getting people to participate. You know, we could build this thing. But if you take the old, if you build it, they will come, good luck. I mean, maybe in your company, people need more technology. I doubt it. If you look at your phone, it's like, I need like another app with a hole in the head, right? I'm like so not interested in another iPhone app, you know, whatever it is. You know, I have to really, really be sold. I'm like saturated on all this. And so what we found is these people that were actually in the business. Some of them were in HR and marketing, but the vast majority were in the business. Like our UK sales leaders up there as an example, all over the world, and they took it on. We gave them a role. Now, they had a full job. I didn't pay them $1. But I gave them a title, I gave them data, I gave them support, and they made it work in their local geographies. And so if you think of a global-local approach where you have global standards and objectives, but local flexibility and adaptation, and we're in 100 countries. An example, I'm in London one day, and one of the big challenges is people didn't have a photo they felt was work appropriate. So they'd have, you know, they're like in a bikini, or their ex-husband's in it, or whatever. So we like brought people out, you know, for that. But we did these photo drives. And in London, it was all about tea and cakes and being very prim and proper and having a professional photo. In Mexico City, the same exact day, it was about a party and getting everyone super excited. They had music, the streamers, whatever. They both worked. They both met the same objective. That's great. Had to have the flexibility. These people helped make it happen and did a lot of influence because we're a highly relationship-driven company. We're brokers. Brokers are relationship people. Super high EQ as a company. Definitely on Myers-Briggs, we're a high-feeling company. So doing things through relationships totally drives it, but it had to be a global footprint.
There's a couple things we learned by doing this. First of all, there were people who were really hungry for this. And it offered a form of recognition. We're going to talk a little bit more about recognition. But it gave them a role that was different and let them stand out in a different way than their area of expertise. Remember, as Ben said, these were full-time employees. They had other jobs. They probably had more than enough of a full-time job. And they did all this involuntary discretionary time, and they came forward. It also allowed us to bring more people in. So we got more people onto the dance floor.
So another thing, again, getting more people involved, giving a part to play. This is not about a couple people doing it. These are photos from our colleagues. We actually did a photo contest. And again, burning off the fog. We were using a stock image gallery, fairly expensive actually, to get photos for the blogs. And we thought, what if we burned off the fog and had, you know, I mean, granted, our colleagues are insurance brokers, but a lot of them can take a picture. And so we found this beautiful collage of photos. We had over 700 submitted, 30,000 votes. Burn off the fog was a fun way, because some colleagues said, you know, I don't really feel like I'm an expert or I want to teach or blog yet, but I definitely have a photo. And it was a great way to bring people in.
I think it was a way to expand. It's sort of like taking that little step, right? So if you're not comfortable yet, how do you make the people in your organization comfortable contributing in a way that they're engaged, in a way that works for them? And the photo contest was just amazing. Far exceeded our expectations.
And I was in a room in Atlanta in January at a conference, and I asked a question, about 500 people in the room, and I said, I'm Ben Brooks, I'm from Marsh, from New York. And this woman like beelines across and comes to me afterwards. She goes, you're from Marsh, and she's not from Marsh. I'm thinking, okay, who is this person so excited about the company? And she said, have you heard of Marsh? I said, as a matter of fact, I am. And she said, you remember the photo contest? I said, yeah. And she said, well, I used to work at Marsh. I won. And she showed me the photo, which I totally remembered instantly. And she just talked about that experience and how fun that was. And although she left our firm and was working in another industry now, it was a very, very positive experience for her. And she still actually had a flip camera we gave her as a prize winner. So So a couple little stories that we learned along the way. Like everyone's a teacher, like Bill. So Bill is about to retire, and Bill is actually an expert at something called trigonometry, the science of slips and falls. Do you guys know about trigonometry? I certainly didn't. So Bill would actually go to places like the Shed Aquarium here in Chicago and help them figure out near the tanks where the water spills over and things, do they have the right, what's the angle, what's the material, they have the right signage and bars and things, all about reducing the chances for their guests at the Shed Aquarium, for example, to be in an injury. We want to mitigate the risk, not solve it. It wasn't about getting a faster ambulance, right? It was about having people not fall. Well, so he got really committed. He said, I'm going to retire in 6 months, and I'm committed to everything I know about this topic. He's one of the only people on our firm that knows about it. Everything I know, I'm going to put on Marsh before I retire. So one of the myths that we found is everyone was like, oh, this social thing is for the whippersnappers or the young people or the digital natives or the wise and millennials and blah, right? So, no. What we actually, because I'd walk around the office and then I'd see like the old people, which really aren't that old, would be at their computer on eBay and Amazon and Perez Hilton or whatever else they were looking at, but they were looking at some really cool websites and transacting. So what we found is that that they wanted to share, and our data shows that the most likely group to blog that's overrepresented for their demographic is 46 to 60-year-olds. Our biggest bloggers are between 46 and 60 years old. Sit with that. In fact, people that are under 25 at our firm are the least likely to blog. Now, some of them, there's some social pressures. They're new. They don't know much. They don't feel like they're comfortable sharing. They don't want the title, whatever. So, what we found through the feedback and from our ambassadors said, you know what? People at the end of their careers or that were older said, you know what? Damn it, I'm so glad I'm getting recognized for knowing something. For the 30 years I've been in this industry, I can actually share beyond the little lunch and learn I do in my office in Seattle. I can actually share around the globe. I can actually leave a legacy and make a difference and be recognized for the fact that, you know what, I could